couldn't do this one. If you want to hear someone read it with some legal expertise, I recommend Melanie Lill or Lawyer You Know. But as for me, I'm handing this over to the Notepad LM guys. Otherwise, this is just going to be a major Aussie rant. Take it away, guys.
Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be diving into a case that has really stirred up a lot of controversy.
Yeah, a lot of anger, actually.
It centers around a recent Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ruling, and let's just say people are not happy.
Definitely not.
We're talking some pretty serious accusations here. Judicial overreach, disregard for jury verdicts, even whispers about the erosion of constitutional rights.
It really cuts to the core of how our justice system works, or how it should work.
And to help us break it all down, court documents from the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts. And we've got some pretty passionate online commentary that, I gotta say, really lays out the outrage.
Both sides of the coin.
So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
This all stems from the trial of Karen Reed, who is facing some extremely serious charges.
Yeah, we're talking murder, DUI, manslaughter, leaving the scene of an accident.
Definitely not a walk in the park.
No.
And this was a long trial, too.
8 weeks.
74 witnesses.
Mountains of evidence.
657 exhibits, to be exact.
Wow, you can't even imagine.
I mean, just think about that. 8 weeks.
Just absorbing all that.
All those witnesses.
Yeah, and then the jury's got to sort through all that.
Exactly.
So naturally, they're going to struggle.
Yeah, you can see that struggle in their communications with the judge.
They sent, like, 3 notes, right?
Over 5 days.
5 days of deliberation.
And each note got, well, more desperate, I guess.
Yeah, like, we can't agree.
We're never gonna agree.
Even though we all have these, like, really strong convictions.
Yeah, they use that phrase, deeply held convictions.
Wow, they must have felt so much pressure.
You would think.
It's like they were afraid of being forced to change their minds.
Right, to compromise what they believed. And then after the third note, boom, just like that.
Judge just shuts it down. No more discussion. Oh, boy.
And that's when things really blew up.
All hell broke loose. And that's what's really at the heart of the public outcry.
The online commentary we have is just scathing, saying the judge completely threw the jury's hard work out the window, showed a blatant disregard for their effort, and might have even dismissed the possibility of partial verdicts.
They really didn't hold back.
No, they did not. But here's where things get really wild.
Okay, I'm listening.
After the trial.
After it's all over.
5 jurors. 5 jurors come forward with sworn statements.
Saying what?
Saying they actually had a unanimous not guilty verdict
On
the murder charge.
Oh, wow.
And on leaving the scene.
So they were only stuck on the
DUI manslaughter.
So, hold on. The judge declared a mistrial when they were actually close to a verdict.
On 2 of the charges.
That makes you question the whole mistrial, right?
Yeah, I mean, what if they're telling the truth?
Right. What if the judge just stopped them too soon?
And that brings us to a huge issue, this idea of double jeopardy.
Ah, the Fifth Amendment, right. Can't be tried twice for the same crime.
Exactly.
So is Karen Reed's defense saying that she was basically acquitted?
On 2 of the charges?
Even though it wasn't formally announced.
Right, so they're saying a retrial would be unconstitutional.
This could be a big problem.
Definitely.
If a jury makes a decision, even if it's not official, can it just be ignored?
It makes you think, like, what's the point of a jury?
Yeah, where's the line between the judge's power and the jury's power?
So let's look at the arguments against what the judge did.
Okay.
The defense is saying she should have at least asked about a partial verdict.
Like, hey, are you guys close on any of these?
Or pulled the jury.
You know, just to be sure.
They're saying they didn't even get a chance to object.
Or suggest anything else.
They feel like the judge just shut them down.
And rush to a mistrial.
Yeah, and that raises questions about whether the process was fair.
To Karen Reed.
To Karen Reed.
To the jury, even.
Right. Was the judge more focused on just ending the trial than on getting it right?
That's a tough one.
So it's a really interesting clash here. You've got the public perception that the judge totally rushed to a mistrial, disregarding the jury's efforts.
And on the flip side, you have the legal reasoning.
Right, the legal reasoning that says, hey, the judge has a responsibility to ensure a fair trial, even if it means a mistrial.
And that tension between how things look to the public and what's happening procedurally, that's where things start to get really interesting and maybe a little concerning for a lot of people.
For sure.
And this case, it kind of goes beyond just legal procedure, like taps into this fear that a lot of people have.
What's that?
This fear that like the system isn't really on your side, that your voice doesn't really matter.
That justice isn't blind.
Exactly.
Like the old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah.
Except here it feels more like it's not what the jury decides, it's what the judge allows.
Right. And that's what's so unsettling for people who believe in trial by jury.
This case throws a wrench into the whole idea of justice being served.
Yeah.
They're claiming that what the judge did basically invalidates whatever the jury was thinking, even if it was pointing towards a not guilty verdict. If the jury's private agreements aren't legally binding, doesn't that create a loophole where a judge could basically manipulate the outcome?
Potentially. Yeah.
It feels like we're on a slippery slope here.
The commentator certainly thinks so.
Yeah.
They keep bringing up how several jurors after the trial said publicly that they were leaning towards not guilty on at least 2 of the charges.
The manslaughter and leaving the scene.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So potentially a partial verdict was right there on the table.
One that could have spared Karen Reed from going through another trial on those charges.
Right, but the SJC, they weren't having it.
So they basically said, what happens in the deliberation room stays in the deliberation room.
Pretty much, the SJC was very clear that those post-trial statements from the jurors, they didn't count as an acquittal.
Why not?
Because a verdict is only valid if it's formally delivered in open court.
But it also makes you think, like, can a legal strategy, trump someone's right to a fair trial?
Yeah, does that override the whole double jeopardy thing?
Good question. In the end, the Supreme Judicial Court, they upheld the mistrial.
Okay.
And they said no to any kind of post-trial investigation.
So they're basically saying, we're going with what was said in court.
And we don't care what the jurors say now.
Wow.
And that's what's got so many people worried.
Yeah, because it's like the court is prioritizing the rules over what actually happened in the jury room.
Like, are jury deliberations even real if they can just be ignored like that?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it's like they're saying, deliberate all you want, but we're only listening to what's said out loud in the courtroom.
Even if there's evidence, evidence that the jury actually reached a different decision.
And if jurors feel like their opinions don't really matter?
Like, what's the point? Why even bother?
Right. We already have enough trouble getting people to serve on juries.
Yeah.
And this kind of thing isn't going to help.
It makes it all seem pointless.
Right, like the whole process is a sham.
If the court can just ignore what the jury decides.
It makes you question that whole idea of a trial by a jury of your peers.
That, right, that's in the Constitution.
Yeah.
It's like, what are we even doing here?
It's all about procedure.
Our substance.
Sticking to the rules, even if it means ignoring what might actually be, well, a just outcome.
And that's what's so scary.
It's like a slippery slope.
Right. Today, it's this DUI manslaughter case.
But tomorrow, it could be anything.
Anything at all.
Any case where the jury's decision just doesn't fit with what the court wants.
Makes you wonder, what is the purpose of a jury?
I mean, couldn't the judge have at least asked the jury? Maybe they just needed a little help explaining what they meant, and then we could have gotten a valid partial verdict.
That's a really good question, and a lot of legal experts are debating that right now.
They're saying this ruling sends a chilling message.
What's that?
Basically, that following the rules is more important than truth and fairness.
Wow.
And they're worried it could set a dangerous precedent where judges have the power to override the jury's will, and that could lead to some really unjust outcomes.
That's a scary thought.
It paints a pretty bleak picture, especially for those of us who believe in the jury system.
Right.
The idea that it's the cornerstone of our democracy.
Yeah.
But is there another side to this story? Is there any way to balance procedural integrity with the public's need for transparency and accountability? And I think that's why this case has people so riled up.
Definitely.
It really highlights that delicate balance between protecting the legal process itself and making sure that justice is actually being served.
And if the public starts to lose faith in that balance, then what happens?
Yeah, what does that mean for the average person who might end up in front of a jury someday?
Right. These are questions that go way beyond Karen Reed's case.
Absolutely.
This case has definitely exposed some weaknesses in our justice system, and it's forcing us to have some uncomfortable conversations.
Like about how much trust we really have in juries.
Yeah.
Our commentator is arguing that rulings like this chip away at that trust.
And I can see their point.
It makes people feel like their voices don't matter.
The system is rigged.
Exactly. And when you get the sense that a judge can just ignore what a jury is leaning towards, it really raises the question of who's actually in charge in the courtroom. Is it the people represented by the jury, Or is it the judge as the guardian of procedure,
It's like the court's following the rules,
but not the spirit of the law?
not the idea behind those rules. You know what I mean?
It's like, yeah, you're technically right.
But are you really upholding justice?
It's a scary precedent,
very scary.
because if we start sacrificing these basic rights just to make things easier,
Just to be efficient.
where does it stop?
Yeah, where do we draw the line?
And think about the jurors.
The people on that jury.
They spend days going over the evidence,
When to reach a decision.
but then it's just thrown out.
Like, it doesn't matter.
How would you feel?
I'd be devastated, I think.
Like, what was the point of all that?
It could make people really cynical about jury duty.
Yeah, like, why bother?
If my opinion doesn't count, why should I care?
And that's dangerous,
Really dangerous for our democracy.
because a healthy democracy needs citizens who participate.
Who are engaged, who take their civic duties seriously.
And if people lose faith in the jury system,
The whole system starts to crumble.
this Karen Reed case, it's a warning sign.
A big one.
It's a question that goes right to the heart of our democracy. Because if the jury system, which is supposed to be the foundation of our legal system, if that's seen as compromised or rigged, what does that say about justice in America?
I mean, this case really reminds us that the pursuit of justice, it's not always a straight line.
No, it's messy and it's complicated, and there are always going to be different perspectives.
But that doesn't mean we should just ignore these tough conversations.
In fact, it's more important than ever to really dig in and wrestle with these issues.
Absolutely.
Because if we don't acknowledge these cracks in the foundation, they're just going to get bigger, and that's bad news for everyone.
Not just the people involved in the case.
Right. It affects the whole fabric of society.
And our commentator is urging us to see this case not as just some isolated thing, but as a symptom of a much bigger problem. This growing gap between the legal system and the people it's supposed to serve.
So they're saying we need more than just legal pronouncements.
Yeah, we need real transparency, accountability, and a willingness to question our assumptions about how things work.
So where do we go from here? How do we reconcile the need for a fair judicial process with the public's right to a system that actually feels just?
Well, maybe this case could be a catalyst for change, you know?
How so?
Maybe it's time to rethink how we handle mistrials, how judges and juries communicate, and that whole balance of power between them.
Interesting.
Maybe we need some new approaches that are more transparent but still protect the integrity of deliberations.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough nut to crack.
It is. There's no easy answers here.
But one thing's for sure.
What's that?
We can't afford to ignore these questions. The stakes are just too high.
Yeah, as citizens, it's our job to push for a justice system that reflects our values.
One that's fair and impartial.
Exactly. This case has sparked a huge debate, and it's up to all of us to keep that going until we find solutions that actually work.
This whole case, it's kind of become a Rorschach test for how people view the American justice system. You know, it's a tough problem to solve.
It is. There are no easy answers here.
One thing's for sure, we can't just bury our heads in the sand.
Absolutely. The stakes are too high.
Exactly. And we as citizens have a responsibility to push for a justice system that reflects our values.
A system that's fair and impartial.
Exactly. This case has really sparked a huge debate, and it's up to all of us to keep that conversation going until we find solutions that actually work.
Well said.
We've covered a lot of ground today, and this deep dive has probably left you with more questions than answers.
I'm sure.
But that's what we're here for, to spark a conversation that needs to happen.
Absolutely.
Keep those wheels turning, folks, because a more just and equitable society demands our constant attention.
Well said.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep diving deep.